In this video, we are going to talk about what happens once you're under contract on a sale in New York City. So let's check it out. Hello everybody, my name is Daniel Ackerman and I'm a listing specialist with the Queens Home team at Keller Williams Realty Landmark 2 in New York City. And what we're talking about today in this video is what happens once you're already under contract on a purchase or sale in New York City. Now, because this video is a little longer and it's got multiple parts, I will put some timestamps in the description below. So if you want to just jump forward to the scenario that applies to you, then you can probably find that in the timestamps down below, whether it's a residential sale, a co-op sale, or a condo sale. I'm going to break all of those down into different sections and to make it a little easier to just jump through your section so you don't have to watch the whole video just to get the information that you need for yourself. Now, if you're a regular watcher of the channel, you may have seen a previous video by George Herrera, our team leader, about the process getting up to this point, primarily for buyers. You know, the process of searching for a home and what it takes to get into contract on a purchase in New York City. If you're interested in seeing that video to get caught up to where we are now, you can take a look at that video right up here on this link. But let's do a quick review of the 8 or so steps that George talks about that will get you up to this point. So first and foremost, you have gotten yourself pre-approved as a buyer. You've gone to a lender and gotten a pre-approval, and that has given you a game plan for how to get prepared for buying, or it's given you your budget for buying. Then you've consulted with an expert realtor, such as a realtor on our team, and you have identified areas and property types that will fit your budget and that would be satisfactory to you. Then you've gone on your search. You've identified target properties, you've made offers, you've negotiated those offers through your agent, and you've reached an acceptable offer between the buyer, yourself, and the seller. Once that acceptable offer happens, you've most likely gotten your inspection if it's a residential property. If it's a co-op or a condo, there may or may not have been an inspection. You often don't do inspections in co-ops. And then if anything came up in that inspection for the home, there may have been a renegotiation, or you may have simply confirmed that you wanted to move forward. At that point, then what's called a deal sheet will have been created by the listing agent, and that is basically the template of everything that's going to go into the contract. And that deal sheet has been reviewed by the buyer's agent and the selling agent, or the seller's agent, and then it goes to the attorneys. The seller's attorney will draft the contract, an initial draft of the contract, and send that to the buyer's attorney. The buyer's attorney and the seller's attorney will go back and forth negotiating language and certain details of the contract. And there might be some input from the agent at this point, but it's mostly between the attorneys. And finally, you've reached the final draft of the contract. Buyer would sign in consultation with their attorney, and then submit that along with their deposit money, which is typically half of the down payment, or sometimes all of the down payment if it's a small down payment. And that will go to the seller's attorney. The deposit check will go into an escrow account, and the seller will countersign the contract, and now you are under contract. Both parties are under contract. Now, nobody can leave the deal voluntarily without some kind of a ramification for them. So that's basically what's gotten you up to this point. What happens next? What happens from the moment you're under contract to the point of closing on the sale? Now, the fact is that it depends. It depends on a couple of things. The property type, primary among them. So depending on what kind of a property you've gone under contract on, the process will vary a little bit. And it also depends on the purchase terms that were agreed to in the contract. So let's look at the simplest, easiest scenario first. And that is a cash purchase of a residential property. So not a condo or a co-op, but a single family up to a 4-family home, all cash purchase. And really, in the most simple scenario, it would be a single family home because there's no tenants or anything like that to be concerned about. And in this situation, it can be very, very fast and very, very simple. So basically, at this point, what would happen is that the buyer's attorney has already done most of the due diligence before going into contract. At that point, then the only thing that the buyer's attorney really has to do is order what's called the title report. So a title company would run the title report. They would be employed by the buyer's attorney or hired by the buyer's attorney to run a title report. And that title report basically is just it establishes a chain of custody or the chain of ownership of the property. So it ensures that the person that's selling the property to the buyer is the rightful owner and the rightful seller of that property and can sell that property free and clear without any encumbrances. But that title report is basically the only thing that needs to be done in a cash purchase, and it can be done in days. So, in an all cash purchase of a single family home, attorney would order the title report. That title report can be done in 7 days, and you can be closing in a week to 15 days on an all cash purchase of a single family home. If there are issues in title, then those will need to be cleared up, and that can delay it a little bit. But typically, a all cash purchase, you've got a title report, not much else, and you're closing within 30 days. So it's pretty quick and pretty simple. Now let's look at the next most simple process, and that would be purchasing a residential property with financing. Very, very common in Queens and Brooklyn. We're talking about a 1 to 4 family property using financing, which is the vast majority of sales, right? Now, in this case, it's a little bit more involved because with financing, you have to go through what's called the underwriting process. So as soon as the attorneys have that contract in place, the lender would be notified and the underwriting process begins. Now, when you are a buyer and you got your pre-approval, you will have submitted all your financial documents, taxes, pay stubs, W-2s, bank statements, all of your credit report would have been run, but that may have been 30, 60, 90 days in the past. Now, when the underwriting process begins, they have to revise and update all of that information. So you as the buyer will have to submit all of that paperwork again with updated statements so that the lender can verify your credit worthiness and the underwriting department can verify that. They are also going to do an appraisal on the property because the property itself is the collateral for the loan. And so the bank or the lender is going to want to verify that the value of the property supports the amount of the loan that they're giving to the buyer. So there's going to be an appraisal, and typically that appraisal will be set up within a week or two of entering into contract, and the bank will reach out to the listing agent to allow access to the appraiser to go in there and do an appraisal. Buyer and seller don't need to be present. In fact, most of the time the agents don't even need to be present, but sometimes either or both, the listing agent and the buyer's agent will want to be there, especially if it's a kind of a high contract price. They'll want to support that as best they can to make sure that the property appraises so that there's no hiccups in the underwriting and the lending process. Because the last thing anybody wants is for the property to under appraise and then somebody's got to come up with more money or you have to renegotiate. But that would be another part of the underwriting process, the appraisal. Once the appraisal comes back and once the underwriting is complete, assuming that everything is good, the lender will issue a loan commitment letter. Now, depending on the attorney, the title report, which is always needed, might have been ordered at the beginning of the process, but a lot of attorneys now are ordering the title report once loan commitment is issued. Some attorneys don't like to do it beforehand because it is a cost to the attorney, and there's a risk that, if the process doesn't go through to the end, they're left holding the bag for that expense, and they don't like to do that. So they like to see a loan commitment first before the title report is ordered. But this is something that you can speak with your attorney about and your agents about, and decide how you want that process to be handled. So that's something that can be worked out with your attorney. But basically, once the underwriting is complete and the loan commitment is issued, you'll have some conditions on there. Those are last little bits of paperwork that need to be done, and usually the title report. So the title report would be done. Any of those last conditions, maybe an updated statement here or there, need to be submitted, and if everything is good, then the bank will issue the clear to close. At that point, you would basically, the attorneys would schedule the closing and the agents would schedule the final walkthrough. The final walkthrough should happen usually the same day of the closing or 24 hours before. You don't want to have a lot of time between the final walkthrough and the closing because you want to minimize the chance of anything happening, any accident or any kind of unforeseen event happening that would change the condition of the property. So fire, natural disaster, a pipe breaks. You want to avoid that possibility. So the final walkthrough is usually handled very close to the closing, usually within 24 hours or on the same day. And then you have your closing. At the closing will be the attorneys, the title company, the bank attorney, and the seller and the buyer, and very often the agents. The agents aren't very involved at the closing, but the attorneys basically sit with their clients, have them sign a bunch of documents, both the seller and the buyer. Buyer writes all these checks and signs them, and that's about it. And that is the process in a residential closing, from contract to close. Now, let's look at the other extreme and the most complicated closing process in New York, which is the co-op closing. So with co-ops, and I'm going to look through my notes here, with co-ops, everything that was true with the finance deal for a residential home, all of that will be true in a co-op as well, and then there's additional layers of complexity. One of those is that when the lender receives the contract, they're going to send the co-op what's called a co-op questionnaire, or sometimes the bank questionnaire. So the attorney will have asked for this, the buyer's attorney will have done a questionnaire, but now the bank needs to do one too. And it's all about any litigation or legal issues in the building, the finances of the building and so forth, because in a co-op, buyers are buying shares in a corporation. So the bank needs to make sure that the financial management of the co-op is in good health, basically, that it's being managed well so that they are not taking on too much risk. So there's going to be that questionnaire. That can take a little time. And in addition, the buyer is going to have to do what's called the package, the board package, or the co-op application package. And this is a dreaded document in New York City, but basically it's an application along with a lot of supporting documentation. This can be a really daunting process. These packages can go up to 200, 300 pages I've seen, and it's a really, really daunting process if you're a buyer. So it's really worth it to hire an excellent team, such as our team, or have a great realtor that can help you with it and guide you through the process, shoulder some of the work, and then make sure that everything you've done is actually accurate and according to what the co-op needs. The appraisal will happen, all of that underwriting stuff will happen, and this board package will take place. This can take 30 to 60 days to put together. And then once the board package is together and you've gotten that commitment letter from the lender, then your buyer's agent will review the package. The listing agent will also review the package to make sure everything is correct and accurate. And then it gets submitted to the management company of the co-op. The management company will make sure that everything is correct and accurate and according to what they need. And then they forward it to the board of the co-op. And the board of the co-op will then schedule a time to review the board package. And sometimes they schedule special meetings for this, and sometimes they just do it at their monthly or bi-monthly meeting. So this can be one of those parts of the process where a lot of time is introduced into the closing process. They will review the package whenever they review it. All right, sorry about that. Little technical difficulties with my sound. Believe it or not, this is actually the third time I've tried to shoot this video. I keep having issues with my sound. The first time, I recorded the whole video and I didn't have my mic on, so it was completely silent. And then I forgot to check the batteries and I just ran out of charge. So hopefully the third time's the charm. Apologies. Nobody ever tells you how difficult YouTubing can be. So, where were we? What we were talking about was the closing. What happens once you're under contract in a co-op? And we got all the way to getting your board package reviewed by the board. So once the package is reviewed by the board, assuming that they approve of it, everything looks good, the finances are strong for the buyer, and they want to move forward, they would issue what's called a provisional approval, basically moving on to the next step, which is that infamous and sometimes dreaded co-op board interview in New York City. Doesn't always happen, but in 99.9% of the cases, there's a board interview for a co-op. And it can range anywhere from just a simple meet and greet kind of thing to a little bit more formal question and answer session, sitting there, usually just in a room around a table with some people, but it can be very formal depending on the co-op. Every co-op is different. So they'll ask questions of the buyer, and then basically the co-op will have an opportunity to either give a final approval, or sometimes what happens is the buyer gets turned down. Now, a co-op can turn down a buyer for any reason, and they don't have to disclose the reason, as long as that reason does not violate fair housing laws. They can turn you down. But in most cases, it doesn't happen. And so assuming that you've been approved by the board, basically you're now moving forward to the final closing phase. Basically, the attorneys would have to get together and schedule something. Now, this is another part of the process for co-op closings where a lot of time can be introduced, because there's a lot more parties involved in the closing than with, let's say, a residential sale. You've got the seller's attorney, the buyer's attorney, the managing or transfer agent for the co-op. You've got the bank attorney, the title company. It's a lot of people. The buyer, the seller themselves, and of course the listing agent and the buyer's agent potentially. So scheduling or coordinating all those schedules can be challenging. So just logistically, this is one of those places where you can introduce a week or two to the closing timeline just because of the difficulty in coordinating so many schedules. Just like in the residential sale, once that closing is scheduled, then you would also have the final walkthrough. And once again, it's just to verify that the condition of the property is what was stipulated in the contract. The contract is always going to say what condition the property needs to be delivered in. The standard language is empty and broom clean. And if there are any things that have been negotiated about things that need to stay or need to be taken out, repairs that need to be made before closing, etc., all of that should be in the contract. So that's why the deal sheet is so important, and that the agents do their job in putting together the deal sheet properly. The property needs to be delivered as stipulated in the contract. So that's what the final walkthrough is to verify all of that. Final walkthrough happens, and then the closing shortly thereafter. Now, from start to finish, from the time you get into contract to the time you close on a co-op sale, can take anywhere from 4 to 6 months. 90 days is on the very fast side for a lot of co-ops. It typically takes a lot longer. And that's simply because, there's so many different things that can introduce extra time in the process, and they have kind of an accordion effect. So if you have one delay at the beginning, that's going to knock you over, another 2-3 weeks for the next step, and then so on and so forth, and everything starts backing up. And just the logistics of getting everything done, it takes time. So co-op closings can take, from contract to close, anywhere from 4 to 6 months, and sometimes even longer in a worst case scenario. So important to know that if you're a buyer or a seller dealing with a co-op property, you need to work that in your timeline, that it can take quite a while. So you got to work backwards from that closing date, incorporate in that closing timeline, and figure out your personal plans. So that's the closing for co-ops. Now let's look at the situation that kind of lands in the middle between the cash-only residential sale and the financed co-op sale, and that would be a condo sale. Okay, a condo purchase or a condo sale. timeline-wise is going to be in the middle of those two. Now, with a cash purchase in a condo, it can move relatively quickly, but more and more condos in New York City are having buyers submit a package very similar to in co-ops. It's a lot of the same paperwork, an application, reference letters, all your financial documents. The difference with condos and co-ops is that while co-ops have an interview process and can turn you down for any reason, condos typically don't have an interview process, and really the only way that they can turn you down is if you're not financially qualified, which shouldn't happen, because if the agents were doing their jobs, then there's no way that an unqualified buyer would get all the way to contract. But they can only turn you down if you're unqualified or through what's called right of first refusal. That basically says that if they're going to turn you down, the condo needs to buy the unit. It's the only way they can keep you from purchasing, and that's rare. So yes, more and more condos are requiring buyers to submit a package, and that package takes a little time to put together. It can take 30 days to put it together. But the approval process, once that package is done, is much, much faster. So if you're a cash buyer, pretty much you're going to finish you're going to get your package done, which should be pretty quick because you're going to have all your financial documents together anyway. And you submit your package, and the management company is going to look it over and approve you. And then you basically just got to run the title report and get to the closing table. So it can be maybe you could probably close in 30 days in a condo, 30 to 45 days in a condo when you're cash only. Most condo sales, you're looking at a finance deal. Then, of course, underwriting applies. There'll be the appraisal. You have all the underwriting between the lender and the buyer. The lender is also going to submit a questionnaire to the condo, just like they did in the co-op. And they're going to get those answers regarding the finances and the management of the building. So all that underwriting process is going to take place. And then you're going to get your loan commitment letter. So it can take 30 to 45 days to get all of that done. And then you submit the board package with the commitment letter to management. Management looks it over. If they approve it, then basically you just got to go back to the lender and get the clear to close. So any last conditions that they need cleared will, they'll notify everybody. And as soon as those conditions are cleared, and those conditions can be, like we said before, can be last minute statements from the buyer, can be the final title report from the attorney, various other odds and ends that the lender may need to issue the clear to close letter. And once that clear to close is issued, then it's down to scheduling the closing day and the final walkthrough. For condos, it's not nearly as complicated as with co-ops. There's going to be a managing agent, bank attorney, title company, and the two attorneys. So it's a little bit more complicated than for a residential sale, but you can generally close on a condo. The timeline is generally similar to a residential home, 60 to 90 days, maybe on the higher end of that. So we normally recommend to count on at least 75 days to 90 plus for a closing on a condo. So guys, that's about it. That's pretty much the process of what happens after contract all the way to when you get to closing. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to get more information like this, you can subscribe to the channel, and you can hit the bell icon, and you'll get options for how you'd like to be notified of all the new content on the channel. My name is Daniel Ackerman, listing specialist with the Queens Home Team. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to come back and watch our other videos. Take care.